During a drought of first-person shooters and dedicated PC games, the mid to late 2000s saw the release of the Stalker games, a trilogy of buggy, broken, and janky Ukrainian survival horror action games that have become some of the most beloved and replayed cult classics in the hardcore PC gaming scene. So when a couple of former developers of Stalker established 4A Games and announced a post-apocalyptic FPS for 2010 based on a 2005 Russian novel, people took notice. Almost a decade on, Metro 2033 has transformed from a middling, difficult but memorable title to a respected and anticipated franchise. I quite liked the original title all the way back when it was released on the Xbox, though I've become more critical of its narrative tropes and haphazard level quality. After the success of the sequel, Last Light, a remastered version of 2033 was released in 2014 for the new generation of consoles and to update the graphics and make tweaks to the only previously semi-functional mechanics, like stealth. Many of my opinions on the game are very subjective and will likely be disagreed on, as while I like some of what Redux does, it's made the experience a lot more casual for the sake of accessibility, which does take away from some of the original's charm for me. While cited as an adaptation, Metro's story only tangentially follows the book's plot, with many liberties taken. Set 20 years after a nuclear apocalypse decimated the planet, the few lucky civilians of Moscow took refuge inside the huge labyrinth of Metro tunnels. Civilization then begins to re-emerge, with new factions and alliances dominating the frequent stations across the Metro, with the young orphan Artyom growing up with little memory of the old world outside of stories and pictures. While mutant wildlife and warring militias sow disorder and violence, the appearance of supernatural entities, known only as the Dark Ones, have begun attacking stations and threaten the future of the remaining humans. In the opening, Artyom coincidentally encounters the Ranger Hunter, who tasks him to travel to the major hub of Polis to find a way to destroy the Dark Ones. After the first half an hour, the next 2/3 of the game are spent making your way to Polis, passing through various stations, dilapidated tunnels and structures, all the while befriending odd characters that make up the journey's numerous vignettes. The journey takes place entirely from the first-person perspective of Artyom, who details current events and objectives between loading screens and journal entries. There are some moral choices that you can make. These can be giving money to street urchins or declining rewards, contributing to either a good or a bad ending. It's a dour world, however there's still a lot of humanity throughout the Metro as men and women, workers and traders, soldiers and mothers with children go about their day. Many of the best written and presented moments of Metro is just listening into the stories and getting comfy with the scenery. Then on the flip side, you have the massive towering frozen ruins of Moscow, its buildings and streets sunken into the ground after years of decay. The silence, aside from the wind and howls of animals, makes these sections very eerie and comfortable, and the thought of tunneling back into the Metro quite appealing. The retrofitted firearms and outfits, with the absence of regular electricity or any real advanced technology, keeps things very precarious and wary. The game does a great job of capturing the mixture of decay, humanity, and history of the Metro, coalescing into one of the most distinctive post-apocalyptic settings. But, to be pedantic, I find the setting very unbelievable and silly in a few ways, and the storytelling itself is average at best. Having livestock like pigs in a food-strapped underground, or the warring factions of Nazis and communists in spite of a very small human population, kills a lot of realism when you really think about it. Then again, ghosts and other supernatural occurrences are a real thing, so maybe it's all figurative. Those players interested in exploring the mystique of the setting will be disappointed, as no matter where you go, every section of the Metro is explained by some companion. You can't ever stop, investigate, and reflect. It's practically a tour at times. Yes, the story is more digestible, but it's overly simplistic. Games like Inside are highly praised for its dialogue-less world building. 4A would sort of fix this in the sequel, at least in reducing the hand-holding. Metro's levels are broken into acts that have some theme or character focused on. As you'd imagine, the stages have you progressing A to B through the Metro, occasionally traversing the surface and some on-rail sections. Occasionally, you'll pass through inhabited stations that offer supplies, gear, weapons, and ammunition you can trade with. Pre-war military bullets are the de facto currency for their quality and rarity. It's an interesting currency system. Besides just buying stuff that can be used in combat for much greater damage. You may consider being frugal, but you're constantly encountering spare bullets across the game, and most high-end gear can be found lying around. Surprisingly, Metro 2033's gameplay better resembles Half-Life 2's than Stalker's, while it's still showing the jankiness of the latter's series. The controls are similar to other FPS's, with iron sights, a 3-weapon limit, medkits, and a few different pipe bombs. The Redux version adds more weapon attachments and smooths out the aiming, making even early weapons fairly useful. There's optional stealth gameplay when encountering human opponents. This was broken in the original as enemies were too easy to alert and weapons like throwing knives being ineffective. The Redux version brings over the same mechanics from Last Light, making it very easy to sleuth through crowds of enemies, as the AI is really dumb and you're practically always silent. Though honestly, stealth matters very little, as the majority of combat is fighting mutant sewer rats and other critters who are unable to avoid and are totally scripted, with many being unkillable. This leads to my greatest issue with Redux. The difficulty has been tweaked to where it's incredibly easy. Supplies are much easier to collect, with unlockable safes that drop enough loot guaranteeing you never run dry. The vanilla version was tough, as it only took a couple of rounds to kill you, even on the normal difficulty, and the numerous environmental traps would crush you. Because the Redux version makes weapons more accurate and buffs Artyom to where you can take on hordes of heavily armed troops, guarantees you can plow through every encounter with ease. This watering down is best exemplified with how a boss fight with a tank during a cart chase has been totally removed, as it was somehow too difficult. Now all you get is just an awkward period of nothing. Many players recommend the survival difficulty mode, which offers the most masochistic challenge, where invaluable items like air filters and gas masks that are needed when above ground become much rarer and delicate. But even then, it's still very easy, as a huge amount of powerful weapons and items are dropped at every turn. Thankfully, the atmosphere of Metro is still here and even improved upon. The remaster improves visual fidelity, with better sounds for firearms, and upgrades environmental effects and features like smoke, dust, fire and light to give an added layer of immersion. Some levels have even been truncated together, removing loading and giving stages much greater flow. If you're going to play Metro 2033, it's going to be for the atmosphere and story, not the gameplay or level design. But like Deus Ex Human Revolution's Director's Cut that added in very obtuse mid-game DLC, you can no longer buy the original version, at least digitally. Physical copies are common, but I much prefer an option like in Homeworld Remastered where you can play the initial unaltered release. Overall, Metro 2033 will always remain a flawed, messy and odd game, but it's a series that's worth playing through for its distinctiveness and direction. With it being often bundled with a much more polished Last Light for mere chump change, it's a title I can recommend to first-person shooter and narrative-oriented players.
Actually, I didn't